I went to the doctor for a routine checkup last week. 2 days later, I was breaking into my mother's home office with a hammer. My mother has given me the same 2 white pills every morning since I was 6 years old, and she always told me I was born with something wrong inside me that only she knew how to treat. She works for a drug company, so I never questioned it. The doctor found chemicals in my blood that he couldn't identify, and when I called my mother to ask what was actually in my pills, she laughed and told me I was being paranoid. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, so I drove to her house the next morning while she was at work. Her home office has been locked my entire life with no explanation, but the lock wasn't built to survive a hammer. Inside, I found filing cabinets lining every wall and a desk covered in folders and paperwork, and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. I grabbed the first folder from the open cabinet because my hands were shaking too hard to do anything else. My own face stared back at me from a photograph taken when I was 7 years old, standing in our kitchen in my school uniform, with no idea that someone was documenting me like a lab rat. The label said Subject 001, and the pages inside tracked my height and weight and sleep patterns for over 20 years, all in my mother's handwriting with little observations in the margins like, responds well to increased dosage, and no adverse reactions noted. I kept digging and found a folder labeled Subject 000, and I recognized the boy in those photos too because it was my older brother Daniel who died when he was 8 years old. My mother always said his heart was too weak, that it just gave out one night while he slept, but the final page of his file was stamped with the words, ended early, heart stopped, like he was a project that got canceled. There were more folders behind his, dozens of them, all with different numbers, and all with the same red stamp on the final page. I found a contract between my mother and a company I'd never heard of, and the terms were simple enough to understand. The pills were supposed to slow down aging, but the only way to prove they actually worked was to cut open the body after death and study what the pills did to the organs. Every test subject had to die at 32, so the results could be compared across the board. I felt my stomach drop. I turned 32 in 3 weeks. The last page in my folder had my subject number at the top and the words final phase approved stamped in red at the bottom. I found my mother's personal notes about Daniel's death in a separate folder, and they read like a homework assignment instead of a grieving mother's journal. She wrote that Subject 000 rejected the stronger dose, and that his heart stopped when she gave him too much. And the final line said, adjusted formula for Subject 001 based on findings, with a little smiley face drawn next to it. I remember my mother crying at Daniel's funeral and holding my hand and telling me we would get through this together, and the whole time she already knew exactly why he was dead because she was the one who killed him. I remember her making me take my pills the morning of the funeral and telling me they would help me feel better. Daniel wasn't born sick, and the pills are what stopped his heart, and my mother watched her own son die and took notes so she could keep me alive longer because I was better data. I found a payment agreement that promised her $3.2 million when I died, and I had to read that number 3 times before it felt real. Then I found the email that made everything click into place. It was dated 4 days ago and sent to someone at the company, and it said, Subject 001 became suspicious after unauthorized blood work and should be moved to final phase immediately. The words final phase kept bouncing around in my head. I stood there with my hands shaking and remembered that my mother called me 2 days ago begging me to come home this weekend because she missed me and wanted to make my favorite dinner. I thought she was being sweet. She was scheduling my death. I heard a car pull into the driveway and my whole body went cold. I moved to the kitchen and saw a pill bottle sitting on the counter with a handwritten note that said, don't forget to take these before dinner. I looked at the back door and then the front door, trying to figure out if I could make it outside before she got in, but I could already hear her footsteps on the porch. Keys jingled in the lock. The front door swung open and my mother's voice rang out warm and sweet like it always did. Sweetheart, did you take your pills yet? I made this batch a little stronger since you said you've been feeling run down.